Hello and welcome to Court Games, a Legend of the Five Rings podcast, funded by the Legend of the Five Rings Discord Patreon.
This podcast will focus on the role-playing game stories and lore for Legend of the Five Rings.
I'm Korvar.
And I'm Kikita Kaori. And today, in lieu of the fact that I have not got my dragon book, if the dragon book even has mysteries in it, we're just going to talk about mysteries because I don't have any fresh access to Kitsuki investigators, and a lot of L5R has a lot of mysteries for your adventures to go on. So
yes,
I thought we'd talk about how to create and run a mystery RPG in Rokugan, or really in whatever campaign you might want to be doing this in.
Yes, not a lot of this is specific to Legend of the Five Rings, but the template of the Emerald Magistrates is a very common one. So they will, your players may well often find themselves in classic mysteries to solve. So we hope this will be of use. In news this week, there is the adventure to accompany Writ of the Wild, and that is called Imperfect Land. It was written by Mary Brennan, and it's out as of December the 5th on Drive-Thru RPG. And we should be providing a link to that in our show notes.
Yeah. Also, we've got people who are pre-reading the Game of 100 Candles by Marie Brennan, which is kind of the follow-up novel to Night of a Thousand Demons. And they really like that book. I haven't read it yet, but you do.
I've had the opportunity to do that, and it's really, really good. It's kind of direct follow-up, only instead of in an isolated village in Dragonlands, we're now in the Phoenix Lands.
And she did come on and say that there will definitely be a third in the series, so that's very exciting. So that's our news for today. Obviously, we're still in this phase of not getting a whole lot of news for L5R, but that's pretty good. And as we said earlier, today we're going to talk about mysteries. Now, we like the idea of mysteries in shows and in books, our media. We do them a lot. And of course, our RPGs are always based on the storytelling we enjoy. So it's very natural for mysteries to be in RPGs, especially one like L5R, where that's almost one of the best ways to get people of different clans together and to use the intrigue as well as the concept, combat side of the setting. Because mysteries can have both. However, there are problems with running mysteries in RPGs. So some elements don't work. It is very easy, for example, for players in a mystery, in an RPG, to not themselves be as brilliant or have access to all of the things that a detective in a show might have. And they get off track and very frustrated with, being forced back on track, or just be, not able to find the clue to know what to do next.
Yes. It's very easy when you're writing a novel to have your incredibly brilliant character always be right when they make an assumption, or, at least you can always ensure that they will pick the clue that leads to the next part of the plot. But when it's players around the table, it's a lot harder, and they things that you think are obvious, they're not obvious, and conclusions that you think, obviously this is the right conclusion, they can go someplace else. They will pick on details that you don't think are important. It's very easy for them to get off track or frustrated, as you say. So that's the thing to look out for. It's also easy in a role-playing game, it's less so, I think, in 5th edition Legend of the Five Rings. But it's fairly easy. Like, in your actual detective fiction, you have the one brilliant detective, but that tends not to work in a role-playing game where you have several people around the table. And having one person who can do all the clever investigating, or the one person who can speak to the dead, and that sort of thing, if that's not a lot of fun for the other 3 or 4 people around the table, if there's only one person doing it, give people a chance to shine, but you do want to include everybody if you can.
Yeah. So communicating, for example, with the dead and having them tell you what happened should have a place in the mystery. Your Shugenja should have something to do, and if that's what they do, that's great. But it shouldn't be like the whole adventure, because then everybody else is left like just carrying water for the character who can do that.
And that can be the same with the Kitsuki investigator as well, or the doji who's just brilliant at getting everybody to confess.
Yes. Everybody needs a bit. Finally, if the players solve the mystery and they do it in a way that the GM finds too easy, like they manage to just latch on for no reason on exactly the right person right away, even just because they guessed right. Okay. It is, and that was the adventure that the GM had planned. It is very tempting for a GM to kind of snatch away the victory by making justice not happen. It's like, oh, you solved it, but now you are going to pay because they're going to get out of it in some way. Now, in Rokugan, justice often is put off. Justice doesn't happen. But if you're tempted to get there because of the game itself was too easy, like the investigation was too easy, and so you have to feel like you need to do that just because of that, then maybe you need to figure out how to make the investigation itself a little beefier so everybody feels like they've fulfilled some accomplishment, even if justice does get snatched out from under the weight of the victory. So they know they found it. They know they found the answer, and that this thing is taking them to the next level of plot, not just we guessed too easy and now you're just taking it away from us.
And also, let the characters be smart. Let them feel awesome.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to try and come up with some ideas and ways of thinking about mystery stories to help GMs kind of address some of those issues. And the first way is to look at the bones of how in real life a mystery is solved. So in a lot of crime dramas and stuff, they have you looking at all these clues and the hair, on under the fingernails or whatever it is, But the meat of how classic investigation is done, the pounding footwork that is done that actually makes it up, is to solve for a mystery of any kind, but let's say a murder, the means, the motive, and the opportunity. That's the 3 parts of solving a mystery in real life. So now you, instead of one thing, who did it, you've now got 3 things for your party to find: the means, the motive, and the opportunity. And those can be found by different people. So now you can split it up between your party. The means is, how was the victim killed? Or how did this particular, mystery happen? This bad thing happened. The means is a really good one for your Kitsuki or Shugenja, or people who have specific expert knowledge about the thing we're being discussed. Let's say death and dying, the center of the investigation. You want your Kitsuki to shine. This is where they shine. They can see these clues. They can understand it. They've got the Burokumen. They can look at the knife wound and say, yes, it was a knife wound in this angle, or whatever it is. The Kitsuki has the experience, or the Shugenja communing with the dead, or asking the kami, like, what happened here.
You could also bring in a skilled swordsman who can say, I know something about the style that was used. This cut is only ever used by this style of kenjutsu, and that's a thing we need to look out for. That can be, you can bring in things that don't, characters who don't actually normally think of as an investigator, but it's a serious trope to go, oh, that's definitely Itoryu style, that strike. The next kind of leg of the investigation, if you like, is motive. Why was this person killed? And this can be very useful for your courtier or your social characters. Depending on who or what, it doesn't necessarily be, if it wasn't necessarily someone killed, it was a theft or was some other thing. This could be where your court characters can take the lead. This could also be where your less salubrious characters, maybe they need to go have a chat to the local gambling dens and see if anyone was owing anybody money, things like that. So you can follow trails like, what was the victim up to? What were their connections? Who benefits from their being killed or whatever the crime is? Who might want this to happen? And that gives you lots of links. And there's a few different ways you can track into that, but that gives you something, especially for your social side and intrigues and things like that.
Right. There's so many ways in 5th edition, especially, to figure out people's motivations. Lots of shuji around it, a lot of opportunity uses. That's where you can really shine, is finding out, why would this victim be killed? What do the people in the environment think about them? Like, if, for example, you want to do a commune with the dead scene to get the means, the spirits aren't going to know why the thing happened. Even the dead person isn't really going to know why. They just know what happened. But motive is why. And then the last leg of the tripod is opportunity, which is, did one of your suspects with motivation have the opportunity to kill the victim using that method, using the means, in that victim's time when they were alive, or during that scene? When did it happen? How did the opportunity arise for it to happen? And this particular area is a really good one for your shinobi players, who can do following people around or sneaking into places or really getting the layout. It can be a good one for physical characters or people who are good at socializing with servants, as opposed to socializing with the other suspects, which you're doing for motive, right? This is like, was anyone standing there during this period of time that day? How did the opportunity happen?
It could also include things like, our suspect, are they capable of doing the thing? In the example of, does this person study Itoryu? Is this person a skilled enough sword fighter to do that strike? Or that sort of thing. Could they fit through that narrow opening, which we think is the only way the killer got in?
Mm-hmm. So then you see if you can do it. So this is a good one, I think, for physical characters, or I want to say your B-list social characters. You're not talking about people with really high vigilance necessarily, or for their target numbers, which is what you want your courtiers working on, because they specialize. But this is people who would give up their information if you asked, but you just need to go talk to a lot more of them. So if you split these three things up, then you have things for basically your whole party to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Because very often you say, oh, there's a mystery to be solved. And a lot of people go, what do we do next?
Mm-hmm.
So in the very least, if you kind of split it up like this, it's a structure for them.
Yep. It's a way of breaking it down. And how would you do this as a GM? As a GM IOC sitting at the table would flat out tell my players that in order to investigate this thing, their investigation won't be considered complete until they have returned all three. I want you to go out and find the means, motive, and opportunity for this crime. And that gives the structure, that gives different people different things to do. It provides a way into it without them just sitting there going, I don't know what to do first. It's like, and you can from there give them a list of the suspects, lists of various people at the site to start working at them. But say, okay, I want you to come back to me when you're done, or and have means, motive, and opportunity. They might argue that in Rokugan, they don't know about the principles of investigation, so don't have a character say it. It's like,
I kind of disagree with that, actually. This is a trope that is very firmly embedded and I think is a bit silly. In, once you've got those, the kind of the laws laid down by Boshi Seiban, can't remember his name.
Mm-hmm.
But once you've got that, then, and when you have the Emerald Magistrates, they aren't idiots. They may not be all that fussed about literal physical evidence, but I still think that if they're Yoriki to an actual Emerald Magistrate, which is a very common starting position, I think that person is very much likely to say, don't come back to me until you've got means, motive, and opportunity. And I'm kind of pushing back into this notion, they're dumb, they don't know how to do investigations, but I think they do. I don't think, yes, it's much more testimony based and stuff like that. And yes, people's status can get in the way, but that doesn't mean they're stupid.
I think that that's very legit. I would still ask for it as a GM as well as the authority character, because that helps the players know what they want, But if they come back to an authority figure and don't have all three, absolutely, then the authority figure they're reporting to can say, but what about why they did it? I can't accuse anybody unless they tell me why they did it. Go find the motive. Or I can't accuse anybody until you can prove that they were there when it happened,
Yeah.
And then to go back and find the opportunity. So
absolutely.
And if the players do come back to their authority figure or take a big action without all three, so you can hint by saying you don't have all three. They can choose to go forward anyway. But that's when you start saying, okay, maybe your effort is not as successful. Maybe some things go wrong because you haven't found all three.
Fundamentally, in a hierarchical society where everyone's got a boss, you're going to have to sell this to people. You're going to have to convince people that this is the right. You are unlikely to be in a situation, maybe sometimes, where you are the authority, you can do what you want. Most of the time, you are going to have to sell your conclusion to someone and convince them. So, have all three. And make it clear to your players that that's what's going to be needed.
Mm-hmm. So, the next aspect, I guess, of doing this is how do you make your suspects list? How do you do this? How do I pick a suspect and make all these other suspects? And what about red herrings? Should I make suspects that aren't suspects? The answer is no. No red herrings.
No red herrings. If at any point, I think there is, theoretically, if you're really good at this, to make a red herring work, whereby following the red herring, that tells them something that gets them on the right path. But if you are listening to a podcast, as you are right now, thinking, should I have red herrings? The answer is no. If you're asking yourself that question, the answer is no, because quite frankly, your players will supply as many red herrings as you could possibly ever want and more. Don't actually provide any of your own.
In general, your suspects can be anyone for any reason. I would say for L5R, keeping your suspects and your victims in similar social backgrounds, because it's more challenging. If you have the victim be well below the suspect's class, then it's really hard to make anything happen on the accusation because, privilege has its privileges, I guess. And vice versa, nobody's going to bother to find the truth. They're just going to kill them first suspect anyway, if the suspect is very far below the victim. So keeping them on the same social class keeps it kind of a mystery. But I am going to tell a very deep GM secret, one that is, the forbidden lore of GMs throughout history and telling a story. So if you do not want to hear this secret and you're a player and you don't want the GM secret ruined for you, you might want to skip ahead 5 or 10 minutes. Okay? All right. The GM should make multiple suspects, all with means, motive, and opportunity. Okay? And whichever one of those suspects the players latch onto the most and manage to find out all three about, that's the one who did it. You don't ever need to have a real for true, this is the person who did it in a game. That's the secret. If the players build their case, latch onto the wrong person, them failing directly doesn't make for a good story. And it doesn't make them feel heroic. It just makes them feel bad. It makes you have to bend over backwards and do weird things to try and put them on the course of the right subject again. And it doesn't make the mystery flow naturally. And you don't need it. You don't need a real for true, this is the person who did it in a game. So whoever they accused, as far as your story is concerned, that's the one who did it. Okay? So there's the evil secret. Just make a bunch of people with means, motive, and opportunity and let the player pick.
And honestly, you can also have for each one of them an if they did it option and an if they didn't option. So if they're focusing on your third pick, then you can start blocking off the first and second. So now they didn't have the opportunity because you've written down an option for, well, okay, if they're not the one who did it, then they weren't anywhere near the geisha house at the time in question. Or if they were there, someone was with them the whole time. Whereas if that was the people the players were focusing on, well, they were mysteriously seen near, but they don't have anyone covering for them. Mm-hmm. And so you've got the option to put them in or put them out as need be.
Right. And just makes it so much more freeform. It's so much easier. You don't have to structure the game so linearly. You just let them ride and, truth comes out at the end of the story. They don't know what happened in your head. That said, this is still Rokugan. There are consequences to whoever they pick. And that's the important part. That's the most important in the mystery. Even if they get the right one, it doesn't mean they didn't help out a villain by taking out a rival or or they didn't hurt an innocent, or they didn't get put in a position of difficulty. So in improv, we have this idea of the principle of yes and, okay, in improv theater. So, somebody starts a scenario, you don't end the scenario saying you're wrong. You say, yes, you're right, and this other thing happens. And this is a very key principle for role-playing games is too. Yes, you're right. And then you focus on the consequence because that's the next step in your campaign.
Yeah. I kind of, there's along with the Rokugan don't know how to do investigations meme, there's the you will never get the right person because they'll be too high status and you can't do anything to them meme. Which I think can be overdone, and you can also make the players feel that the whole investigation was pointless. So you may want to be careful with that one, or give them ways around it.
You want to make sure that you say that they're right, and they feel the glow of being right, and then the next thing happens. Give them that moment.
Yeah, but I think you have to be cautious about, this was all someone else's evil plan and you all fell for it, or that sort of thing. You did damage along the way. Not avoid it completely, but I don't think it's necessarily one you should use an awful lot, or the players are just going to stop feeling that they're going to be able to accomplish anything. Because it's all very well knowing who did it if nothing ever happens. So, a balance, as with all things. So having talked about suspects, the next thing to look is, okay, clues. Clues is another very important part of an investigation. Now, the physical clues that you may find are really only useful if they point towards means, motive, or opportunity. So there are obviously going to be clues about means. So, what is the wound type? How did someone gain entry to this room? Those sorts of things. You can also help narrow down from a potential pool of suspects, which I guess comes into, I'm not quite sure whether that comes into means or opportunity now I think about it. Like if you find out that the person was very tall, whoever did this must have been quite tall. That's a very classic one. Look at the footsteps. Look at where they wrote their message of evil on the wall. They must be quite tall. I'm not quite sure whether that comes under means or opportunity, but they point towards one of those things. That's what they should be doing.
Right. But overall, especially, we talk about, diminishing evidence as opposed to testimony. Moving means, motive, and opportunity into like the social world more than the, So in Western American CSI storytelling, we're very big on these physical clues, right? And I'm not saying you can't have them. You can have them, but they aren't as important as there's discovering them.
There's I think where they become important is just different. You can't take that clue to your boss and say, therefore I've solved the mystery. But it is going to point your character in the right direction. And then you do the social stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you can use them. They're there. I'm just saying they don't necessarily have to be there for a mystery. Actually, they're not required. They are a good use for characters who have offbeat skills or passions, those sorts of things that they never get to use because the game doesn't go that way. Design or seafaring or labor or commerce or aesthetics. Whatever the rarer skills is for your campaign that certain characters have chosen to foster, that's where you want them to shine with finding physical clues. So you have the person who's just crazy passionate about Ikebana. Go ahead and put a clue in the broken branch of the cherry tree that is over there. I mean, okay, you've got your mantis who never uses seafaring. Well, all knots are seafaring. So put, something in the cords or the tying or anything like that. There are many chances to use skills that don't get used otherwise. And that's what you want for these clues most of all. Save your standards, the social skills, theology, combat skills, which are always used in the rest of the investigation or often the rest of the campaign. Those get used and worked out a lot. Try and find use here for people's offbeat.
Yeah. Although there's nothing wrong with, I believe it was, I can't remember if it was Dashiell Hammett, one of the classic pulp novel writers. If things are getting slow, have someone come through the room with a gun. Although I suppose it'll be with a katana in Rokugan.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
But,
we've got that in a minute.
It's not the most important part, but sometimes, you might want to use it to spice it up. But they get a lot of work out in other areas of the game, so they can be on the back burner for this. Yeah, you can let the players and the characters take the lead and fill in clues if you think they're floundering. Great use, to get a little L5R-ish for once. There are opportunities. Opportunities are fantastic for this sort of thing, where you can I'm going to roll to see if I can work something out. And, oh, look, an opportunity, which I will just let the GM decide if I can find a thing. Because you can discover things, you can state that you find stuff, all sorts of very useful things, which in a lot of games you just don't have. So even if they technically fail a roll, they could use opportunities to find something that they weren't quite expecting. Like, I'm going to search the rack of books and scrolls for a clue. Maybe they fail, but they've got opportunities. So you say, well, no, but there is a squeaky floorboard you discover as you're walking about.
I guess that's why that is why I like to de-emphasize clues and say it's not as important. You planning the mystery ahead of time do not need to work out the clues.
No, not so much.
You work out the clues on the fly based on what skills your characters bring to the table and employ. You might have some ideas if you've got some good offbeat skills that you want to encourage your players to use. But you don't need to work out all your clues. Let them come up to support what they're learning in it. Because it's not, what happened is flexible because the story is flexible. We talked about that. All right. And again, you don't, as for clues, as for people, you don't need red herrings. You don't want to make clues that point nowhere. Everything is pointing towards the end of the story. The players might make their own anyway and then discard them as a red herring. That's fine. Let them.
Yeah.
But don't try and intentionally hurt your players on this.
I mean, again, this is a thing that works fine, or at least a lot better in novels and such, where having the character wander off into a dead end for a bit is perfectly fine because you can write the stuff in and make it interesting, possibly even let that red herring lead them to somewhere useful. But that's when you're in complete control and you're writing everything and you don't have some players who are trying to get something done.
Mm-hmm.
So no red herrings.
So how do you get that feel for a mystery story? Well, a lot of mystery stories have a story arc, which kind of follows the path. You want the goal of all of this storytelling is so that from beginning to end, you have a good story that everybody can go, wow, that was a good adventure for my characters, and we'll go drink about it at the pub afterwards and tell all these poor random people about the cool mystery you just solved. I mean, that's your goal as a GM, right? How do you make this flexible framework that we've talked about feel like a coherent story? Well, there is a kind of a classic story arc that works for mysteries. We talked about this a little bit for our romance episode, but mysteries kind of have the same thing, okay? First of all, in the story arc of a mystery, you have an instigating incident. This is usually just before the PCs arrive. It can happen after the PCs have arrived, but when they're paying attention somewhere else.
So the next thing that's happened is that the PCs will arrive, whether they've been told to go there or whether they stumble across it or whichever. They will end up at the crime scene and they will assess what they find there.
Once they've come to the crime scene and they're assessed it, they've gotten their first looking for means, motive, opportunity. So they're doing that social or observational or communing or whatever thing that they're going to do to try and find these three things. At that point, you get a period of rising action. And this is about what's happening to the NPCs. While the PCs are investigating, the NPCs, the people around who were there at the beginning, are beginning to get angry or scared, or the situation itself is getting more tense as the stakes get higher and time pressure is on. Maybe you introduce the concept that the daimyo is going to arrive or something is going to arrive in a certain amount of time. You want to start putting pressure on it. Maybe people are beginning to protest that they think they're going to be accused, or maybe they're frightened that the murderer is still there, or something kind of like start slowly putting the screws on the investigation, amping up the tension, whether it's time tension or emotional tension. And this should, if your players are doing their investigation part, correspond, interestingly enough, to their rising strife levels as they keep more strife during their investigation. So that works.
At some point, you want to twist. There's some fundamental understanding that the characters are wrong about something, or there's a new piece of information which comes to light, and thus everything they've been thinking up to this point turns out to be wrong. Or you can have things like the stakes are much higher than you thought. It isn't just one person. It's going to be several people. Or the person who was killed wasn't as ordinary as they looked. It turns out that they're terribly, terribly important.
Right. Something put it into jeopardy.
Yes, it turns out there was actually two people in that room at that time, and now there's someone missing, and you don't know where they are.
Mm-hmm.
loads of things. Something new has come in and throws a whole new light on everything.
If you're watching classic mysteries, this is when the second body turns up.
Yes.
Almost always. But something happens to make the investigation change in a dramatic fashion. You want one of those thrown into the middle of your investigation after this period of rising action. And it could be due to what the PCs have done, or it could be due to something else. Events are occurring without the PCs' involvement. As I said, another body shows up. That slams on top of that rising action, that increasing tension, and kind of gives it a blowout moment. You could also end up having a fight at that moment, too. It's just kind of like a climax within the story. The next stage after the twist in a mystery story is, what I'm calling drawing together the threads. So at this point, the PCs have reviewed all of their information. They've assembled the pieces of their investigation, and they've determined the suspect. And they've at least think that they've got means, motive, and opportunity, or they're almost there. In a mystery, this would be when, after the twist, you bring the PCs together in the bathhouse to discuss what they've discovered.
Yeah.
For example, that's how you do. So you have everybody scattering, following their investigation, trying to find these things. You need to bring them all together so they can come up with their conclusions. So, you want to give the PCs a bit of privacy and some time to just hash out OOC and IC, like what they're going to do next.
And so you want this very classic scene, the "I'm sure you're wondering why I brought you all together" kind of thing, which is just so classic. And so, like, it's not necessarily quite like that. It could be the classic thing where you bring all the suspects together and you go through them one by one and then say, "Oh, that's why you didn't do it." And then, but maybe it was you. And then finally you pick them up, you bring out the one person who did do it. Or you socially get them to blurt out a confession. That's always very classic. But it could also be, this is where you bring it to the boss.
Mm-hmm.
This could be the trial. This could be, it could be the moment where you decide that you're going to take justice into your own hands and turn up and go, "This is because of the murder you did." So this is kind of the big dramatic climax of it. And this is where you bring out the means, the motive, and the opportunity and put it all together in front of, the right person.
Now, it can be the PCs go directly to their suspect, depending on what the crime is, and say, "Look, I have you on means, motive, and opportunity." Basically, this stage I call the accusation. So that, we've drawn together the threads. At some point, you make the accusation, whether you make it to the suspect, to an authority, to a whole group of people, or you determine the truth itself, write it on a piece of paper and stick it in the bottom of the sea. Somehow, you have made the accusation. The final step of an investigation is the wrap-up. The important thing about the wrap-up is the continuation. So you've made your accusation. So we said we've had no false herrings. We don't believe in false herrings. So PCs are right. But the investigation concludes, but it has links to how the story continues in the next phase of the game. Unless this is a one-shot, in which case you're done. But usually you want your continuation to carry you forward into the next part of the game. And that yes and is the important part. So instigating incident, PCs arrive and assess the scenario, rising action, the twist, drawing together the threads, the accusation, and the wrap-up. That's the story arc of a mystery story. And most of those you can help keep the PCs on track with that, even though they're doing whatever it is that they want to do, because you can keep that going based on the actions of the NPCs. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a story arc.
Yeah. And then once you're wrapping it up, so here are some ideas for how that wrap up can lead to the next part of the adventure, or even sometimes the next adventure. So sometimes, even if it's not a one shot, that's that story over. But now we're going to move on to the next one, and here is how that investigation or that wrap up leads on to the next one.
We're going to give you a bunch of ways to wrap up. We'll list them together. But there's a part A and a part B for each of these. And these are mix and match. So you can take any of these part A's and match it to any part B and come up with the end for your scenario. So these don't necessarily just go together. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So here's an example. Part A. Your PCs have to prove their case in an intrigue or trial before a magistrate.
Yeah.
Part B, the consequence. Someone is who's watching that trial is so impressed by their skills that they want them to tackle another case for them and comes to them afterwards. Part A and Part B.
Here's another one. The investigators make the results of their investigation known, whether to public in a trial or whatever, but the suspect commits seppuku before it is revealed publicly. Part B, a very powerful and very unscrupulous enemy of the suspect invites the party for tea to thank them for bringing down their most dangerous rival.
Now you're in trouble. Part A of another scenario. The suspect is summarily taken into custody and executed. You won. Yay, good. Part B. The suspect's family or friends or secret organization now hates you and is going to start bringing down the PCs in revenge for taking down their person.
Yeah. We were talking about all the normal skills like fighting and spellcasting and stuff being used all the time. Well, this is where they come in. Suddenly blades in the dark and all that kind of unpleasantness.
Mm-hmm.
Another option, the suspect learns that the party has found them and flees. And that can result in the party then being commissioned to follow them, or they find that someone is missing that the suspect may have taken with them when they fled.
Right. Another adventure. Go find the dingus or person that got kidnapped as a hostage. Well, because the suspect fled. Fled.
All
right. Part A. The suspect, upon being accused or finding out this, directly challenges the PCs to a duel. That could be it.
Mm-hmm.
Part B. As I said, these are all mix and match. The suspect is found dead by someone else's hand before the duel can even occur.
Oh, no. Your reward for solving the mystery is another mystery.
Absolutely. That's classic.
Part A, someone responsible for the suspect has them killed to cover the shame of what they've done to their family, to their daimyo, to their secret organization. But Part B, there's every chance that the suspect's death was to cover up involvement or conspiracy by someone else who was actually responsible.
So you found the suspect, and the suspect's killed when everything happens. But you find out in searching the suspect's death that somebody else was responsible for them and had them killed to cover it up.
Yep.
They could, Part A, if the PCs go to the suspect with their accusation privately, this is an option. And all of these are mix and match. For Part B, the suspect could, on being accused, publicly or privately, offer up a much more powerful, much more dangerous villain to the Empire or to the PCs if they are allowed to go, including a new threat that the PCs must follow through on.
That's an interesting dilemma. I like that one. And finally, for this little section, we have the PCs accusing a person of wrongdoing and they're taking it to trial, or they're taking it to the authorities. But whoever's in charge, the judge or the magistrate or the daimyo, they side with the suspect and they claim the PCs have made false accusations. But Part B, the PCs received confirmation privately through another source that they were in fact correct the whole time, and that this authority figure, this magistrate or daimyo or whoever, has been corrupted, either directly or maybe they're being blackmailed. And so now that's what they have to deal with.
So any of these can go together with any other ones.
Yep.
So, we put them together like this, but you can just grab any part A and any part B and make yourself a scenario to come out of what the PCs do, and you will have a brand new adventure the PCs will have to follow up with. So hopefully they all sound pretty Rokugani. And it's always the interesting part is the most interesting part is giving them the victory, giving the PCs the victory. You solved it.
Yep.
What happens next? How does this lead to the next stage of the stories? So I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. So we'd like to say thanks very much to you for listening, but also we'd like to give a shout out to our sister podcast, Fortune and Strife, who is our affiliated actual play podcast. What are you guys up to kind of now-ish?
We are just fleeing the Burning Sands. So that'll be coming up soon. We have been hanging out in the Burning Sands with the unicorn for a while and need to get back to Rokugan.
Yep, time to get home. She left some washing on the line. Need to get back to it. And we'd also like to give a big thanks to our friends at D20 Radio, who provide an enormous amount of role-playing game podcast content. So if there's anything you're interested, you will find it at D20 Radio.
Yes, you will. Our content is funded by the Community Discord Patreon, which supports our editing costs, as well as our website, where you can store and see longer-term information, summaries of our podcast, RPG tools, and more. We are migrating to Notion. Things are a little strange, but we're still working on it. So
yep.
Hopefully it's all there. For our Patreons, we have special bonus content like Adventure Seeds, early access to our AP podcast, and other things as we think of them. Online, you can find us at our website at courtgamespod.com, on Twitter at twitter.com/courtgamespod, and on Patreon at patreon.com/courtgames. But that is it for us this week. This is Kakita Kaori, and may the fortunes favor you.
I have been Korvar, and until we meet again, keep your jade handy.
Correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com